That's right. Against all odds is back, and we're going to be diving into some of the conference realignment that we see going on across the college level as the end of the Pac-12, Pac less, Pac whatever has a nearly century-old conference could be seeing its last season, as we've seen the Pac-12 conference basically pilfered for every team. I believe it's Washington State and Oregon State are the only two teams that basically will be out without a conference as we move into the 24th season. And does this mean that there are mega conferences on the horizon for a few of these conferences that we see? As we're talking about conferences with nearly 20 teams in them. How will this shake out for the future? That is yet to be seen, but moving into the 2024 season, you can already go ahead and add UCLA, USC, Oregon, and Washington to big, I believe, Big Ten. Moving their number up somewhere around 18 teams. You also see that the Big 12 is not far behind with adding teams, as we'll see the likes of Buffalo, Arizona State, and Utah all joining the Big 12 conference next season. And it's surprising that we saw this unfold as quickly as it has. Usually, you don't see teams cut and run from conferences like this, or I should say schools, not teams. But over the course of the past couple of years, we've not only seen there be, you know, team schools like Texas and Oklahoma moving to the, SEC, leaving Big 12. You know, some say, move like this by a conference like the Big 12 is an attempt to fill that gap left by those schools. But in my opinion, a lot of this is driven specifically by revenue. And when you look at things, you do see that a lot of ESPN and Fox are both heavily invested in separate conferences, but Fox with the Big Ten and ESPN with the SEC. Now, what is funny, ESPN also owns and operates the ACC network, though you clearly see where their priorities are when it comes to pushing one over the other. Now, this is so it is not surprising to see teams like Texas and Oklahoma move to the SEC. A lot of this is brand power. You know, these are names that are recognizable across the country, even to a more casual fan. Yes, Texas football is big in the state of Texas. We've seen the School of Texas be able to put together their own TV network and media rights deals over the years through the Longhorn Network. I'm not sure if that'll be coming to an end specifically, or maybe that'll be tied into possibly some of the SEC network or broadcasting. But that's just one example of how these schools are drawing in revenue for the likes of an ESPN or a Fox, where in the past you might have seen things like level of competition be a main factor in some of these schools trying to move to different conferences, or their level of competition was not on par with what they were seeing through media rights. And that's where you see movement in those areas. But here over the past few years, it's been clear that if you're not in the Big 12, or excuse me, the Big Ten, if you're not in the SEC, it's slim pickings on where you're going to find potential media rights deals that will potentially pay out in appeasing ways to help keep some of these larger schools and larger brands. Because while we see, you know, the Pac conference out west basically dying, the the ACC could be on the verge of something similar. Now, we have seen in the past recent weeks that the ACC has added teams. SMU, uh, who are the others? Cal and Stanford, I believe, are being added into the ACC as well. And a lot of people ask questions why these teams, their location and proximity to the ACC is not one that would, typically be appeasing when you're talking about scheduling or making these games happen. But a big point that is interesting, that maybe not a lot of people will hear mentioned, if the ACC drops below 15 teams within their conference, they won't be, excuse me, ESPN can renegotiate their media rights deal for the ACC network. And that's big in a lot of ways because, as money's driving these things, and to basically have a deal renegotiated for less, that's not going to be the type of thing that draws in people. And you see, we got a couple people in the chat. Mr. Brandon Bizel, what is up, my man? Also got Raven Ron out there. Yeah, let's, you know, there's a lot of legitimate reasons to not want to see a lot of this conference realignment happen, and one being the lack of potential of being able to see your team, whether it be in person or even through TV, and depending on how things shake out that way. But also, a lot of you're losing a lot of what made especially college football great, but a lot of the collegiate sports, and you get these great rivalries between more regional schools or regional areas. And to a lot of people, these rivalries matter. There's a reason why game day goes week to week from location to location. They ain't showing up just because of the game on the field. They're also showing up because the way people and the fans show out for these events and games, and you're going to be losing that. And in a lot of ways, you're losing that for basically brand recognition, because we're not talking about a specific conference or even necessarily multiple conferences that have dominated the landscape in one respect or the other. The SEC over the past few decades has been able to pull away, but in my opinion, that's due a lot to a few individual teams, and the SEC in a whole is not the conference that many people would like you to believe it is, because it is another conference out there bordering on getting any teams. Now, yes, the addition of Texas and Oklahoma bolsters their lineup better than what you were looking at in the past. But beyond the top 4 or 5 teams in the SEC, you're not looking at teams that are much, if any, better than the middle of the pack in a lot of these other conferences, whether it be the Big 12, Big 10, ACC, and even some of the lower tier teams in the SEC probably aren't on par with some of the stronger teams that you're going to find in the group of 5 conferences. So, to say that there's a specific conference out there right now dominating the landscape of the game, feel that's inaccurate, because yes, the likes of Alabama and a Georgia have dominated things like the college playoffs. You also see where a team like Clemson for a number of years was racking up not only appearances but titles. So is it fair to say that the ACC was starting to dominate the landscape of college football in that instance? Not really. And as you look at the SEC, yes, Alabama has done their thing over the past number of years. Yes, Georgia seems to be becoming that powerhouse that Alabama was. Beyond those 2 teams, looking at the college playoffs, there's not much there outside of those 2 teams. You have an appearance from an LSU, and this can be said for a lot of conferences, or whether it be the Big 10, Big 12. You're talking more about specific schools dominating the headlines and brand recognition more so than the conference that they represent. I do believe that the idea of a 12 game playoff or whatever they expand the playoffs to has a lot more to do with they can't put together the playoffs in the same fashion that they would have because you don't have the conferences built in the same fashion, but also the more games they add, the more revenue they add. And I think college football playoffs and the conference realignment that we're seeing going on go a lot hand in hand because in a lot of ways it comes back down to that almighty dollar, and whether it be the ones at the directors at schools or just being more driven by the media side of things and through things like the media rights deals. Um, we found ourselves in the wild west of college sports with NIL deals, and yes, that could easily play into this as well as a number of things. But one thing that has seemed to be consistent throughout all of this is it's likely going to be the college fan that suffers the most from this, whether it be rivalries being put to an end, um, the, the parents of students or athletes that can't attend their kids' games for the most part, which is something that is not uncommon, especially at you know college level when you're not talking about necessarily five-star kids at every position, every school. So there are some of the amenities that have drawn people to places in the past that won't be there anymore. Um, and so it will definitely be interesting to see how things go throughout the future when it comes to conference realignment. Now, I know, folks, we had NFL Sunday back this past Sunday, and had a few upsets. Had you know a shocker in Sunday night football with the New York Giants putting up a major goose egg in near monsoon weather. So I think there's a lot to digest from week one, but we also have our first Monday night game of the season. Yes, it is 9/11, night that we all remember what occurred 22 years ago, and it is not something to forget, and it's not something to take lightly. Now, you have the New York Jets taking on the Buffalo Bills in MetLife Stadium. Unfortunately, the Giants weren't able to deliver a performance in New York City that would be worth remembering. So we're just going to move right on into the New York Jets game tonight, where we see them coming in as an underdog against the Buffalo Bills. Minus 2.5, I believe, is where I saw the line. But one thing's for sure, there's a lot of questions surrounding this Jets team because we've seen a lot of changes from this past offseason. They've added Aaron Rodgers, they've added Dalvin Cook, they've shored up a number of things in their defense, extending defensive tackle. Forget his name off the top of my head, but locking him up for a few years. Yes, currently you can find the Buffalo Bills as a 2-point favorite in this game at some sports books. I think that says a lot more about the Bills than it does the Jets because I think there's a few questions surrounding how this Bills team is going to move forward. They've been on the cusp of reaching Super Bowls in the past and just haven't been able to find that little bit of extra to push them over the top. The New York Jets come into the season with probably the highest hopes they've had in the past number of seasons, adding, the likes of Aaron Rodgers and Dalvin Cook. We also got Garrett Wilson. We expect to see Bryce Hall for a healthy season, and given what we saw out of him last year, it's going to be interesting to see what we get out of this Jets offense. Can they keep up with the Bills? Well, books think that this game will be a bit more on the defensive side, seeing a lower game total at 44.5. Given the spread, we're talking about scores something along the lines of 21 to 23. Not expecting a lot of touchdowns in this game. Now, rage all today seems to be that everybody loves the same game parlay. Well, I got a nice little one for y'all coming into this game as we got Allen to throw an interception. Now, this is something that Josh Allen has struggled with in the past. Not, yes, he's turned over the ball with fumbles, but interceptions have been something that he has struggled with. So we got Josh Allen throwing an interception, Buffalo winning outright on the money line, and Allen over 6.5 carries in this game. We've all seen how much of a factor Josh Allen has been in this running game, whether it be intentional or not. Josh Allen, he runs the ball. He's going to pick up carries. I'm sure the coaching staff would probably like to see him do so less, but it is an ability within his bag. And looking at plus 350 on this parlay, gotta like that number. Definitely think Buffalo wins this game outright. And as I said, Allen struggled with the interceptions, only needing one in this game. You can't expect them to throw the ball. Any idiot with Stephon Diggs on the team is throwing the ball, so do expect for the ball to be thrown around. What is going on, my man Reg? Living big with Big Reg. Mr. might be going through a name change. We don't know yet, but we'll see. Now, like I said, got the same game parlay for tonight with the New York Jets taking on the Buffalo Bills. Allen to throw an interception, Buffalo to win outright. Allen over 6.5 carries. Now, as we move forward into the next couple of weeks, it will be interesting to see how things shape up in the NFL. Do the Chiefs bounce back from that week 1 loss? Does the Washington Commanders rack up another win and keep the enemy above his former team's record? Just saying, there's a lot to keep your eyes open for, especially not only with what's going on tonight, taking a little peek at what will be going on Thursday night. We do have the Minnesota Vikings taking on the Philadelphia Eagles, and you already see this at a bit of a large spread, -7.5. Minnesota did not look good as they took on a team that many people felt to be one that will be struggling throughout the majority of the season. A lot of people had the Minnesota Vikings beating the Bucs in week 1, and that was not the case. Apparently, Baker Mayfield decided to show up and just ruin that experience. But honestly, folks, if you're backing Kirk Cousins that hard, you might be setting yourself up for failure to begin with. Now, looking at the spread, -7.5, that is a bordering on a large spread. Now, we did see where the Eagles got up early on the New England Patriots, but were not able to extend that lead, and we even saw New England get back into that game and potentially have a chance to win the game. So it's hard to want to back the Philadelphia Eagles given this spread, being this early in the season. I will say you won't catch me taking points with the Vikings anytime soon. This was a team that last year a lot of people, they wanted to throw around the terms like frauds and fakes. Well, they definitely didn't step up and win the games that they needed to when it came late in the season last year, and they're not off to the greatest of starts. Maybe keeping Dalvin Cook wouldn't have been such a bad thing. Who knows? We'll see. Maybe he goes out and puts up a nice chunk of yards for the New York Jets. We'll definitely be finding out. But as I said, looking at the spread, at least for the meantime, I would not be happy backing the Eagles with a spread this large. It is early in the season. A lot of these teams do not use preseason in the same fashion that we have seen, typically in the past when they had that fourth and extra game to work a lot of the kinks and junk out of the system, knock the rust off. And so a lot of these teams, they're willing to sacrifice week 1, week 2 as potential quote unquote playoff game or preseason. So looking at that spread Thursday night, and yes, Thursday night is infamous for bad football. Definitely not touching that one. Now, this has been Against All Odds. Make sure you're hitting that like and subscribe button, folks. So you can be up to date on everything coming out. Now, I said last week it would probably be streaming on Tuesdays. That may not be the case as I'm going through a few things, finding the right day that'll work for my schedule. But you can definitely catch me next week, possibly on a Sunday. Make sure to hit that notification bell, and you won't have to worry as much. Now, it's D Weezy, y'all. Twinkle, twinkle, baby.